college Republicans in just a little bit, and called Ken and asked if I could come to the breakfast today to listen to our governor and soon to be, I guess, senator. But at any rate, the elections this year, and you've got all of your delegates running, your senates running, what we want you to do is not let anybody that's currently an incumbent get defeated. Be sure and get out and vote. And even if they're unopposed, vote for them. Because if they get a 95% or 100%, maybe it'll scare people off next time too. So the reason I'm saying this, the whole country is watching the Virginia elections this year. I go to RNC meetings and they tell me, we're watching you. Just like they did 2 years ago after the current occupant of the White House, and I had difficulty calling him president, but the current occupant of the White House won, and he carried Virginia. And there was a feel around the country, was this going to keep carrying over? And then we said the next year, we've already had enough of him. And we voted in Bob and Bill and Ken. The following year, we took 3 kind of congressional seats, including Scott over in this area. And we sent a message. They're watching this year to see if the blame game that's being placed on our Republicans, on the Tea Party people, on anybody that doesn't agree with the current occupant of the White House, is the blame game working? So they're telling me if we can win the Senate, pick up those 2 to 3 seats we need, pick up a couple of House seats, then the word will go out to the country, the blame game isn't working, and Virginia is going to be the first state to repudiate Obama, and we're going to carry it through next year. Now, why is that important for next year? Because I've been told that if Virginia's electoral votes don't go Republican, the current occupant of the White House will stay there. And that if Virginia's votes don't elect a Republican United States Senator, then the Senate is going to stay in a Democrat majority. So it's that simple. If we want to win, we've got to win this year and send the message. Next year, elect a Republican, and any of them running is better than what's in there right now, and elect a United States Senator to get us the majority we need in the United States Senate.
This time, Delegate Bob Perkey is going to do our introductions for Governor Allen. So please welcome once again Delegate Bob Perkey.
Thank you all so much for being here, and thank you for the opportunity to introduce my friend George. He'll always be George with me, whether he's governor, whether he's senator, or some other lofty position. Ladies and gentlemen, I had the pleasure of serving with George in the House of Delegates. He will tell you that this was the root of his upbringing, so to speak, politically. George knows that our government today overspends, overregulates, overvilifies business. He knows indeed the need to have fiscal responsibility come back to Washington. We have a government today that really is questioning the very fiber of our country. When you look at the Jeffersonian principles that George totally adheres to, and when you look at what's happening in Washington today, and you understand and realize that indeed we have lived beyond our means for so long, the bills are coming due. And it doesn't matter whether a Democrat's in the House, in the White House, or a Republican. Frankly, ladies and gentlemen, the bills are due. And we cannot continue to spend 24 to 25% of our GDP on government at all levels. And you know, when you look at the role of the dollar in the world and how this really affects the very fiber of our economic vitality and viability, and when you look at President Reagan, and when you look at the principles that President Reagan espoused, adhered to, you look at a younger version, frankly, of Ronald Reagan with George Allen. When I first got there, George was there. And before any new delegate votes, they look up on the board and they see how other people vote, who they believe they should follow. And the top voting board was Allen and Aitchison, two very conservative Republicans. And I made sure that if I ever had a question as to how I voted on a particular issue, I would see how George voted, and I would see how Steve Agee voted. Because I found that indeed they didn't vote wrong. They and I tried to vote together, or I tried to vote with them. But in a world where we have a super connected world, where we have instant news and instant coverage, George knows and understands that our world has dramatically changed. He also knows that there's a lack of confidence of government, this huge uncertainty prevailing in our country today in Washington, the fear of intrusive government, the fear of regulations, the fear of the cost, size, growth, and scope of government, expanding to the point where indeed our very democracy is being threatened. There's no coherent energy policy, no coherent policy to develop jobs. This fear of government, this financial policy, when I watched the president the other night, I begged in my mind, say something that will be helpful. Tell us what you're going to do about the NLRB. Tell us that Virginia's right to work state is not going to be threatened. I know when George Allen gets back in the Senate, indeed we will have that fear laid to rest. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a mistrust of Washington today, the likes of which I've never seen. There's a mistrust of government, the likes of which I've never seen. This intrusive government that we have now, trying to usurp the very fiber of our country, is something we have never witnessed. Diversity is the future of this country. It's the future of this party. Whoever wins the middle in this election will win these elections. If you go into Northern Virginia today, as George does on a regular basis, and as you see what Bob McDonald put together up there, the coalition of all diverse groups, if you look around this room today, one of the weaknesses, one of the great weaknesses of the Republican parties is we have not addressed or attracted the diversity that we need to address and attract. Governor Allen knows this. We know this. And it is a weakness that we must overcome. Because frankly, ladies and gentlemen, George Allen knows that our future is very, very bright. But we must be the big tent party, which we are and are going to be forever. When I look at the National Labor Relations Board, when I look at the trying to keep a company like Boeing from going down to that state to build factories and create jobs, I have made economic development trips with Governor Allen. We've gone to New York, we've gone to other places, and we've gone all over. And I've watched him sit down and arrange conference calls with technology firms and Old Dominion University. And let me just share with you, Governor Allen knows this. You cannot win an election at Virginia Beach without the support of Old Dominion University. Frankly, the voters in Virginia Beach are very much affected by the alumni from ODU, the college, and I introduced Governor Allen. In fact, when Jim Cook was president of Old Dominion, I called Jim. I said, Jim, you want to meet George Allen? He's running for governor. He doesn't have the nomination yet, but he's going to get elected. So he says, I'll give him 15 minutes. So George and I went down to see Jim Cook. 2 hours later, a friendship had been formed that will never be broken. Now, when George got ready to really get serious, and after he got the nomination, Old Dominion brought him down, put him on statewide TeleTechNet, and he conveyed a message statewide that never wavered. And this is one thing about George. His principles never waver. And when you talk about a competent person, he has managed a state. He has superb managerial experience. You know, our president, and I've wanted him to be successful, had no managerial experience. You know, when I go out and meet with college students, I ask them all to raise their right hand. I ask them to make a pledge. And the pledge is, I pledge. So I'll go to school, I'll make really good grades, I will not waste my parents' money, and I will not become a political science major. Now, the reason I ask that pledge, very frankly, is we need technology students. Governor Allen knows this. I mean, one of the very first bills, the private-public partnership bills was George's. I mean, I could tell you so many things that this man did. He has wisdom, he has principles, he has knowledge, he has managerial experience, and he has the conservative Jeffersonian principles. But you know, when you look at startup capital, and I use OL, not AL, we want to be the startup capital of the world. If we're going to create jobs, and George Allen knows about jobs, we have got to be the STEM capital of the world, science, technology, engineering, and math. And George knows this. He preaches this. He espouses this. And he lives this. So, again, please help us do everything we can to remove the fear of government, to remove the fear of an intrusive, abusive government, and do everything we possibly can to get this good friend nominated and get this good friend elected to the Senate of Virginia. I'm sorry. That would help too. To the Senate of the United States. Because, you know, in the House, Barry, Sal, Ronnie and I and the others, we can handle things in the House of Delegates in Virginia now. George will help us with the state Senate. He will help us in the U.S. Senate. And if you really want to get rid of Dodd-Frank and some of the crowd that hangs on in the other chamber, help us spread the message. Each one of you needs to contact 100 people. And on election day, Virginia Beach must be the pivotal point that will help this good man regain the Senate and represent us in Washington the way we need to be represented. I give you my good friend.
Thank you. Well, Delegate Perkey, Chairman Mullins, Chairman Longo, members of the House of Delegates, City Council, School Board, Patriots, all good morning. Good morning. It is a good morning, a great day to be alive here in Virginia Beach and Virginia. First, let me say, Bob, thank you for the very kind introductions. First time I've had a chance to be with you in person since Tanya's passing, and I'm glad you're here. The bed's your bride, who's up in heaven, looking down and saying, Bob, you got to be out and about and staying active. And thank you, Bob, for your leadership. Our hearts ache with you, and we admire everything about you and your wonderful bride and the many years you had together as teammates, and you're carrying that torch forward. And so, Bob, thank you. You're a good friend, a good man, and a wonderful leader. Folks, today is a day you ought to remember. 9/10/11. It'll never come around again. 9/10/11. And you think of 10 years ago on this date, and I was talking to these young folks here, 19-year-old, they were 9. You remind me of our youngest children, or all our children, Susan and ours, and a lot of young people's, their whole frame of reference is after 9/11 and that world that we've been living through the last 10 years, and how that really changed our country in so many ways. I was in Washington, D.C. when those attacks hit and saw the evacuation of the Capitol and people running all over. They're saying, oh, the next plane's coming in, the Pentagon's been hit. They were evacuating Laura Bush, and they said, you've got to get out of here. There's everyone scurrying around everywhere and crossing over the Potomac River on the Woodrow Wilson Bridge and seeing the smoke billowing out of the Pentagon. And there's just so many memories, especially not for all of us, but for those who are, as far as the ground zero of Virginia, or our Virginia in D.C., there's all those memories. Our family had just moved up to Northern Virginia, to Mount Vernon, just the Friday before we closed on a house. And there was a little boy named Nick who saw, oh, they have bicycles. That means there's kids moving into the neighborhood. And so this young boy named Nick came over, wanted to make friends with all of our 3 kids. And lo and behold, his father was on that American Airlines Flight 77 that had crashed into the Pentagon. And that's how we ended up meeting our neighbors, was a candlelight vigil for the Jacoby family. And the captain of that plane was Chick Burlingame. And he was a Navy captain, he was in the reserves. There's a whole fight after this as to whether or not he should be buried in a separate grave at Arlington, and his wife wanted him buried separately as opposed to with his parents. And Captain Burlingame, I said, well, you should be, there's a big fight in the Army to finally get him his own grave so his wife eventually could be buried alongside of him, and worked with his family. You've probably seen Deborah Burlingame. She's been one of the great leaders to make sure we do always remember and never forget. And they asked me to speak at his funeral, and I keep on my dresser in a mirror, they asked a poem, I Did Not Die. And this is a picture of Captain Burlingame, and I've just been carrying it with me this week. And I keep some dog tags that a woman in the Shenandoah Valley gave me who lost her son in the war in Iraq. And we need to remember all that's good and wholesome about this country. Really be thankful for, obviously remember those, the 3,000 who lost their lives 10 years ago tomorrow. And also remember others who lost their lives, those firefighters going up into the Twin Towers, knowing that most likely they weren't going to get out of there alive, trying to get people to come out. The people who rushed into the Pentagon, into that acrid smoke, just saying, we don't know what's in there, but we got to get people out, try to save folks. And the men and women who subsequently have fought and served our military and taking the fight to these terrorists, these vile, hate-filled terrorists who despise everything that is good and wholesome about our country, the freedom of expression, the freedom of religion, the rights of men and women to achieve and have an opportunity. Everything that's good they hate about our country. And these men and women took the fight to them. And many did not come home, and their families are missing those young ones. And so as we draw down our troops from Afghanistan and Iraq, please make sure you thank every one of those families for the losses they've endured, the sacrifices they've made to make sure this country stays that beacon of hope, that land of opportunity for all. And we always must remember. And then when you all, Ken, great program for today. And I love the song, the Alamo, remember the Alamo and remember 9/11. But I remember after everyone, they scattered everyone, we moved our Senate offices to my home. We said, well, we got to have some other place of operations. But many of us went back to the Capitol that night on 9/11 and went on the Capitol steps and sang God Bless America. That's what was so touching about the beginning of this ceremony here today, or this meeting here in Virginia Beach. And I'm going to talk about a lot of issues and ideas to get our country going, but let's remember, again, what makes sure that we're the land of the free, and it's because we are the home of the brave. And I don't know, I guess it was already stated, but anybody who served in the armed forces, would you please stand up so we can salute and thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So folks, why are we here? Why are we here on this morning? Because we care about America. We care about our country. We want to save America. We want to make sure that the American dream is there for future generations. The reason I've gotten off the sidelines and back into the fight is probably many of the same emotions, sentiments, observations that you all have about the direction of our country. Susan and I saw our oldest daughter graduate last year from James Madison University. All sorts of hope and all sorts of excitement. And then she moves home. That was humorous to some extent. But she's lucky. She eventually found a job. But a lot of her friends and her peers, I tell you, for young people graduating from college, and not just those in undergraduate, even postgraduate school, are having a very difficult time finding work. And a lot of them eventually do find work, but whether they're young people or middle-aged people, a lot of the jobs people are finding, it's not just unemployment, it is underemployment, where people's talents and skills are not being fully utilized. And so you see that, and it's not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons that I got back into the fight. It's not an easy decision to get back into elective office. Susan and I have been helping out folks like Scott Ridgell. Great job, way to go getting Scott Ridgell elected. and other members of the General Assembly. Stolly's around here somewhere. There you are. The Pier Party, Thelma and the Beach Boys party continues, and Ron Villanueva and Sal Aliquinto and others. And in fact, losing was a very humbling experience. I didn't like losing. But sometimes you do learn more from losing than you do from winning. And one of the things I learned from football, and George Corte, my good teammate from UVA's here, but what my father taught all his kids is when you get knocked down, you get back up. You don't brood over your mistakes, you learn from them, and you improve. And that's what I intend to do, and our campaign intends to do. And this is going to be a campaign for Virginia. Virginia values and Virginia voices have been ignored in Washington. Our country is going in the wrong direction. Our military is doing a great job, no question about it. And in fact, that is the primary, and I know I see constitutions around here. When you look at the federal government, which was created by the states, not the other way around, it's preeminent responsibility of the federal government's national defense and national security. And they're doing a great job in that area. But other than that, other than, say, protecting our God-given rights, making sure we have unimpeded interstate commerce, I think the federal government ought to stay out of our lives and stay out of our businesses. And I trust Bob Perkey and Ron Villanueva and Delegate Stolle and Delegate Bright and others in the legislature and your local government more than I trust Harry Reid and Chuck Schumer and that kind of folks for deciding what ought to be going on in Virginia. We're losing control of our own destiny because of the policies in Washington. We're vulnerable to outside forces because of our dangerous levels of debt as well as our counterproductive energy policies in our country. Now the good news is, folks, our country doesn't need to continue declining with diminished opportunities. What we need to be doing is recognizing that what made America great are three key principles. Number one, freedom and liberty. Secondly, this needs to be a land of opportunity for all, regardless of one's race, religion, ethnicity, or gender. And thirdly, the key principle is personal responsibility. Responsibility for oneself, for one's family, for one's community. What's been happening in Washington is the opposite of that. They're having dictates from a centralized government, mandates, redistribution, and this initiative sapping dependency on government. Yep. Now, I believe it's time for America's comeback, and we've put out our blueprint for America's comeback. I'll highlight a few points of it, and you should go to it at georgeallen.com. But there's three key things that need to get done. Number one, we need to get our country more competitive for investment and jobs. Number two, we need to unleash our American energy resources. And number three, we need to rein in this overspending, overreaching federal government. And in each of those areas, I'm advocating, because this is what we have to do. We need to not just say what we're against. Yeah, it's really important to play tenacious defense against bad ideas. I think, Bob, if we're going to welcome more people to join our team, you need to be putting forward positive, constructive, proven ideas, good solutions, achievable reforms that make sense to folks at their kitchen tables, and say, you're welcome to join our team. And these are the ideas that we want to advance if we're given the opportunity to be in the majority rather than the minority in the United States Senate. Number one, as far as jobs, which is by far the number one issue I hear from people, and Pat, you and I were campaigning for the state Senate candidates in Southwest Virginia. Jobs, by far the number one issue. Down here in the Hampton Roads area, jobs. Northern Virginia, jobs. Southside Virginia, jobs is a big issue. Well, here's one thing that would send a message to the rest of the world that America's open for business again, and that is to reduce the second highest taxes on job-creating businesses in the world at 35%, if you reduced it to 20%, which is better than the international average. That alone, reducing the taxes to 20% on job-creating businesses, small, medium, and large size, would create 500,000 new jobs a year. That's 5 million jobs over a 10-year period. Let's have a government that puts our job creators at an advantage rather than a disadvantage, and that's what we need to do. right there. Send that message. And these regulators, who in the heck elected EPA? No one. No one. These unaccountable, unelected bureaucrats are imposing regulations on job creators across the country. You have most recently this seeming to me overzealous attack on Gibson Guitar, treating a respected business as if, you know, these are Al Capone's gang or something. Then, Bob, you mentioned the National Labor Relations Board suing a company for locating in South Carolina a right-to-work state. My opponent, Tim Kaine, has actually justified why the National Labor Relations Board ought to be suing or questioning and having this suit against Boeing. My friends, we have freedom of movement in this country. You can move to Tennessee, you can move to North Carolina, heck, you could even, if you wanted to, move to Maryland. The point is, you have freedom of movement in this country, and this attack on Boeing and South Carolina is an attack on Virginia as well. We're a right-to-work state. I know as governor, recruiting businesses to Virginia, the fact that we are the furthest state north on the eastern seaboard with a right-to-work law gave us a great competitive advantage, especially along the Interstate 81 corridor. A lot of companies, Target, Best Buy, Family Dollar, and others came in. They wanted to serve the north but operate out of Interstate 81 in the valley in a right-to-work state. And Tim Kaine, because of all this union support and so forth, is on the wrong side of that. But my friends, it's more than just jobs. The right-to-work law, which many people in business know what it is, a lot of people don't. Explain it this way. It's a matter of liberty. It says that the law is very simple. It says that a working man or working woman shall not be forced or compelled to pay $700 a year in union dues or fees as a condition of work. So it's a matter of personal liberty. And we're in a minority of states who have it. Now, if I'm fortunate enough to fight for you all again in the U.S. Senate, I'm going to be one who's just saying, look, you're not doing anything to wreck one of Virginia's foundational strengths of liberty, and that's our right-to-work law. And we need to stand up to these union bosses that are putting our country in a competitive disadvantage. These sort of lawsuits from these unelected bureaucrats up in the National Labor Relations Board need to stop. And I'm going to stand strong for our right-to-work laws and the freedom of working men and working women. Now, second. Now, energy. Folks, we are blessed. We are blessed in America in so many ways, and one of them is our energy resources. We're #1 in the world when it comes to energy resources. Thanks to our plentiful coal, we're finding more natural gas, and we do have oil in our country as well. These sanctimonious social engineers up in Washington, they look at these resources not as a blessing, but as a curse. We have a government that lends $2 billion of our money to the state-owned oil company, Hector and I were talking about this, to the state-owned oil company of Brazil, for them to drill for oil and off their coast, and then they shut down Virginia. Now, I know Virginians, and I've heard from Virginians, from the coal fields to here in Virginia Beach. We are ready, willing, and able to provide those energy resources to power Virginia and power America. Yes. And let's unleash those resources. Now, unleashing these resources, here's the benefit of it. #1, jobs. We could literally have hundreds of thousands of good-paying jobs from Virginia to the Gulf, from the Appalachians to the Rockies to Alaska. Good-paying jobs in this country. We'd have more affordable energy, more affordable electricity, more affordable fuels, which means you have more affordable food. It also makes our country more competitive for investment and jobs. It's important for our national security that we're not subject to the whims of these hostile dictators, oligarchs, and cartels. It also means we keep our money here in the United States of America. Yeah. We need the political will to unleash those resources. And by the way, even coal. You say, oh, what does coal matter here? Coal matters, you all see all the colliers lined up here. That means jobs at Norfolk Southern that hauls a lot of coal. Norfolk Southern just ordered 1,500 new coal rail cars. Those coal rail cars are made in Roanoke, Virginia. That company has just hired on 200 more people to fulfill that order. So it means jobs from the coal fields clear across Virginia. And thirdly, what we have to do in reining in the federal government is, again, look what Ron Villanueva does in the House of Delegates, what Bob Perkey does, what Delegate Bright does, what Sal Iaquinto and Senator Wagner and others, is Virginia operates the way we operate our businesses and the way we operate our household budgets. It's balanced. You can't spend more than you take in. Federal government right now, 40 cents of every dollar in spending is being borrowed. You just can't, you couldn't live that way. If every month you're paying off your bills and you have 40% of it, say you got $1,000 of bills and you only have $600 in your checking account, and you said, well, just going to roll this over on a credit card and not pay it, you wouldn't last very long that way. Now, what needs to be done in the federal government, this is an idea that everyone understands, 49 states have it, and that is a balanced budget requirement in the Constitution of the United States. It makes sense. The other thing is they don't have line item veto authority. I used that as governor 17 times. And after you use it a few times, they get the message. And whether it's, I was one of those dozen that voted against that bridge to nowhere in Alaska. And then, great, we voted against it. I wish we had more, but they were all fearful of Ted Stevens, the powerful chairman of the committee, and this, that, and the other. Well, if the president had line item veto authority, the president then has accountability. Rather than saying, well, this is a big bill and it's got all these necessary expenditures in there and we can't veto it because of these items. But the point is if you have line item veto authority, then the president has that responsibility. And it's not as if I actually think the president would love to have it, but that's one of the things that Ronald Reagan said needed to get done, as well as a balanced budget amendment. And I think it's high time we have that as well. The other thing is regulating these regulators. Mention the National Labor Relations Board. These unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats are really wrecking our country in many respects. EPA on these cap and trade energy taxes, it's just wrong for them to do it. What we want in our Constitution is accountability. This is a representative democracy. You can't vote out people in these bureaucracies. And my view is what we did in Virginia would apply, I think, to the federal government as well. Is whenever there's a proposed regulation, what needs to be done is an economic impact. In other words, see what the impact of this is on families, on small businesses, on jobs. And if the impact is over $100 million, members of Congress need to vote. They need to vote on it. And if you don't like the way a member of Congress votes, you can vote them out. You can't vote out these bureaucrats. And there needs to be brought an accountability to Washington. And this reining in the regulators is really an important aspect of how we get our country more competitive for investment and jobs. And Bob said this in his own way. We need to reinvigorate, and I'll say it my way. My view is we need to reinvigorate the entrepreneurial spirit of our country. And how you do that are what we were just talking about. You have to have the right economic policies, the right energy policies, and education. And if you want to see who's winning amongst the states, we're talking about different states and what they're doing, the people of America have been voting with their feet for the last several decades. They've been moving to the south and to the Mountain West. California, for the first time ever in this last census, did not gain population faster than the rest of the country. Ever since 1850, California's always been growing faster than the rest of the country. But California has, while it's a beautiful state and they have good waves and all of that, and good weather and so forth, they have the highest income taxes, the highest sales taxes. They're very anti-business. Their energy policies are absurd. And what's happening is California is not growing like the rest of the country. That's why it's been very beneficial to Arizona and other western states. People have been moving to the south and the Mountain West. Why? What are the commonalities? Lower taxes, more affordable energy, right to work laws, and a well-educated population. That's where ODU, for example, comes in. And I think education is primarily a state and local responsibility. ODU is great. I just visited there again and went to see the Teletechnet. And I actually ran into parents of young woman, who actually through the Higher Ed Center in Abingdon was able to get a nursing degree and not having to leave home. Their modeling and simulation at ODU is fantastic, what they're doing there with a lot of doctor training, particularly for the military, which is just fantastic. And then the bioelectric aspect of it as well. So we have some great institutions of higher education here in Virginia, and that's very important. So those are the things we need to do to get our country going in the right direction. There are a lot of ideas that you may have. I want to actually answer some of your questions, hear some of your insight. Young folks, this is about your future. We want to make sure it's an American comeback so that the American dream that many of us who are older inherited from previous generations, that opportunity is there for you. So the new members here, young folks, young recruits to the Republican team here in Virginia Beach, welcome, and thank all of you all for caring about Virginia Beach and having that confidence that I have in faith in Virginians and faith in America's future if we adhere to those foundational principles of trusting free people and free enterprise. Thank you all, and I look forward to